They buried a king, and then the desert finished the job. Not a single dramatic night raid that erased everything, but a slow, patient covering. Wind-driven sand, seasonal silt, collapsed stone, and human reuse. Over generations, a stairway becomes a slope, a marker stone becomes a pile of rubble, and an entrance simply disappears from living memory. Then sometimes by accident, and sometimes by careful science, a sliver of pottery or a radar blip pulls the curtain back, and a sealed world opens. That reveal can change how we think about an entire period, not because of gold alone, but because buried things carry data. Names, diets, trade links, and the everyday paperwork of life and labor. Imagine for a moment a shallow depression at the edge of a valley. In one season, the Nile floods, washing silt into that hollow. In the next, winds rework that silt into ripples and dunes. A low entrance, maybe only a few steps down, can be choked in a generation of storms. Marker cairns topple, lintels crack, plaster flakes away. In a landscape of shifting sands, the ground keeps rewriting its own map. That's the first thief. Environment. It's slow and relentless, and it doesn't leave a dramatic scene to narrate, just a quiet, accumulating loss. The second thief is people. Over centuries, local communities find it practical to reuse dressed stone and plaster. Tombs that once marked sacred ground become convenient quarries for houses, for wells, for village ovens. Looting happens in waves, sometimes in antiquity, sometimes in modern times, and not always in big cinematic heists. Often in a matter of scraping for metal fittings or removing a few bricks. Over time, the context that makes a burial meaningful, its approach, its markers, its reading of landscape, dissolves. A tomb isn't always lost because it was intentionally hidden. Sometimes it simply becomes part of the working landscape, and its identity is erased. So how do archaeologists find what the landscape has hidden? Rediscovery is a mix of chance and method. The chance stories are irresistible. The shepherd who stumbles on a carved stone, the farmer who turns up a potsherd, a storm that scours a dune and reveals a square of dressed stone. Those stories make headlines because they have drama. But luck rarely stands alone. Real, repeatable discoveries come from trained eyes reading subtle clues, patterns of spoil heaps, alignment of stone, anomalies in soil color, or odd vegetation patterns where moisture collects differently. Early 20th century archaeology gives us a vivid model of patient, clue-driven work. Howard Carter's discovery of KV-62, the tomb of Tutankhamun, didn't happen because he suddenly thought, here's where a king must be. It happened because he and his team cleared systematically, noticed patterns, and followed very small hints until a sealed flight of steps appeared. The sealed state of KV-62 meant organic materials, textiles, and delicate pigments survived in a way they rarely do. That preservation changed scholarship because objects and inscriptions that might have decayed in an open context were preserved precisely because they were sealed by sand and debris. Modern teams add tools to patient observation. Ground-penetrating radar can reveal voids and density changes beneath the surface. LiDAR flown from drones or aircraft peels away surface noise and maps microtopography with millimeter precision. Satellite imagery, increasingly available at higher resolution, sometimes shows linear features or soil discolorations that hint at subsurface architecture. These technologies do not dig the tomb for you. They turn an otherwise opaque mound into a readable signal. A radar anomaly becomes a target for a small, carefully controlled trench. A satellite line leads surveyors to a place where a pottery shard might surface. The new workflow is often remote sensing points the search, careful test trenches confirm it, and patient excavation follows. But discovery is only half the story. Opening a sealed chamber changes it immediately. Conditions inside a closed tomb can be remarkably stable for centuries. Low humidity, stable salts, minimal microbial activity. The instant you expose that microenvironment to new air, light, and humidity, fragile organics begin to decay. Salt efflorescence blooms. Organic dyes fade. Textile fibers become brittle. That's why conservation planning must be part of discovery from day one. The ethical obligation isn't only to record and publish. It's to stabilize, conserve, and where feasible, involve local institutions in long-term care. Sometimes teams even choose to record, stabilize, and then rebury sensitive contexts until proper conservation resources are available. That counterintuitive move, reburying a discovery, is a responsible choice when exposure would do more harm than good. What do these discoveries actually give us beyond spectacular images? They give data, the building blocks of historical reconstructions. A jar with a stamped mark can reveal trade links. Bone chemistry and isotope analysis tell us where people grew up and what they ate. Tool marks and construction debris point to labor organization. Graffiti and pottery stamps sometimes preserve the names of work crews. Those small, prosaic items often rewrite big narratives. A shard stamped with a crew name can change how we think about workforce organization. A piece of imported pottery can alter assumptions about trade routes. An unexpected inscription can reset a dynasty's chronology. In other words, the routine stuff of life often has the highest explanatory power. We must also confront the ethical and political dimensions. When a chamber opens, multiple stakeholders claim interest. Local communities, national museums, scholarly teams, and the public. There's a long history of objects leaving their contexts and traveling to foreign museums, sometimes with poor documentation. The contemporary standard tries to reverse that, work in partnership with national authorities, train local conservators, and design exhibitions and publications that return context rather than strip it. Practical stewardship reduces looting. When local people have a role and pride in their heritage, they become its best guardians. There are tactical differences in the kinds of rediscoveries we see. Some are accidental. A single shirt emerges and leads to a stairway. Others are tech-driven. A radar grid highlights a rectangular void and a trench confirms a shaft. Both routes matter, and both raise different logistical challenges. Accidental finds require rapid response conservation. Tech-driven finds allow for more planning, but also sometimes create a false sense of certainty. A radar signature might be a natural void or a modern disturbance. That's why follow-up excavation and careful recording remain indispensable. Let me sketch a composite discovery to make this practical. A shepherd kicks up a fragment of painted pottery on a dune. A local museum curator recognizes the fragment as potentially ancient and notifies a university team. The team runs a small radar survey and spots an anomaly. Over weeks, they excavate a narrow trench, revealing a blocked entrance. They open a sealed stairway and find a small chamber. Inside, objects are dusty but intact. A bowl with residue useful for pollen and plant analysis. Textile fragments that survive under low oxygen. A potsherd stamped with a workshop mark. Conservators wrap the most vulnerable pieces on site and move them to a stabilized tent. Samples are sent for isotope and radiocarbon testing. Over the next year, lab results trace some materials to distant workshops, and the shard stamp connects to a known crew name. What began as a piece of pottery becomes a thread that rewrites aspects of how people organized labor and where they sourced materials. There are, sadly, also stories where haste and politics ruin the narrative. Looting often follows publicity. Delicate pigments flake when exposed improperly. Badly documented removals destroy the contextual relationships archaeologists need. That's why best practice is transparency, slow publication, and local partnership. Conservation is expensive and slow, and good stewardship means planning for 50 years, not just 50 days. So why do lost tombs capture our imagination? Because they are time capsules, yes, but also because they give us stories with human faces. Workers' names scraped into potsherds tell us about the people who built palaces and tombs. Medical evidence in worker cemeteries shows injuries and care, a social reality behind monumental claims. Rediscovery reconnects us to communities and to the small acts that made large achievements possible. If one detail lingers from listening, let it be this. Sometimes the most decisive find is the smallest. A stamped pottery shard, a faded graffiti line, a healed fracture in a skeleton. These ordinary things tell extraordinary stories. They give us the connections between kings and communities, between construction and daily life, between grand monuments and the people who made them real. Tell me in comments, would you want to find treasure, a private diary, or a worker's name? And why? Type one word and one short reason. I'll pin the best replies and make it short. Subscribe for more evidence-first history and share this with someone who thinks the past is only about kings and gold. The truth is more human and often more surprising. Thanks for listening.